Hey everyone, how's it going? Yeah, you read that right. I'm covering the first of many aggravating stories from Zeb Wells' Spider-Man run. Spider-Man X-Men Dark Web. But before I can cover that nightmare of a story, I need to shed some light on the story's antagonist, to both help explain some elements in the story that could confuse a few newcomers, and to recommend better storylines that don't make us suffer nom-style flashbacks to our times in middle school having to talk to that edgelord kid who wouldn't shut up about their Sonic the Hedgehog OC that's totally darker than Shadow and uber cool. And of course to do a few character spotlights on the story's biggest victims. Sorry to those waiting on the Firestar video, it will have its day. I just realized this video is going to take way too long if I try to explain it in the main review, and I don't wish to suffer this much crap for that long. As for who the two poor souls that Wells decided to tackle, well, we'll start with the greatest victim of Parker luck, Ben Reilly. Ben's life began with the death of another, Gwen Stacy, one of the great loves of Peter's life. But unbeknownst to both Peter and Gwen, there was another admirer. Professor Miles Warren was a teacher at Empire State, and though he came off as the kind mentor to the couple, he was deep down a troubled man who had an unhealthy infatuation with Gwen, and when she died that night on the bridge, it became a sick obsession that would lead to him wanting both Gwen back and the revenge on the one who he believed killed her. Spider-Man. And thus began the Clone Saga. No, not yet. The original Clone Saga started in 1973, where Miles, now going by the supervillain moniker The Jackal, cloned both Gwen and Peter in an elaborate plan that would lead to Peter fighting his clone to the death, only for it to end with the two teaming up, but one of them supposedly dying in a heroic sacrifice, with it even being left up in the air on which one was Peter and who was the clone, since the clone believed that he was the original, and both remember being kidnapped by the Jackal before meeting. Though Peter would decide clone or not, he was Peter Parker, and that's all that matters. Fast forward to 2 decades later, and we learn that the clone did not die and eventually discovered he was a clone when he witnessed Peter and MJ being together and breaking down at the sight of it. Marvel editors in a nutshell. Actually, it's because he only has memories up before they started dating, so it was very easy for him to put 2 and 2 together, even though it really broke him to do so. He would leave New York and suffered from depression, as he saw himself as nothing more than a cheap copy who has no real worth in life, even talking someone into just ending it themselves, but quickly realizing that he was wrong in stopping them. It's a very powerful scene as you witness him realize that yeah, he got royally screwed, but that doesn't mean it needs to be the end of his story, but the beginning. He would find a new lease on life and eventually a new name, proudly calling himself Ben Reilly, his first name being of course Uncle Ben and Aunt May for Reilly, as it was her maiden name. Ben would go on to make a life for himself and even find love in Janine Godby. More on her, check out my review of Hallows Eve last month. Now, it wasn't easy still. Clone or not, Parker luck will still come into effect as he did run into trouble, the biggest one being fellow clone Kane, who, just a reminder, is my favorite Marvel character. But the bad luck would simmer down for Ben, and it seemed his life would be at peace. As we get into the 90s Clone Saga, after Aunt May suffers one of many heart attacks, she's left in a critical condition, leading to her to actually being killed off in the end. Despite being a clone, Ben still wanted to pay respects to her and try to see her secretly. Unfortunately, Peter would run into Ben, and it would lead to a fight with one of them having a nervous breakdown. Get used to hearing that. In this case, it was Peter, as his life has, you guessed it, gone to crap. His best friend died, just dealt with the horrors that was Maximum Carnage. It was made to believe his parents were alive for months, only to be revealed to be shape-shifting robots that were created by an evil AI programmed with the mind of his previously mentioned dead friend. And he started to separate himself from his superhero persona, calling himself the Spider. Yeah, Mr. Wentworth lawyers would like a word. This was done because originally Marvel editorial and marketing was planning to retire the Peter Parker character, as they were suffering bankruptcy and believed that it was due to the comics becoming stale, as nothing was really changing changing for the characters at the time. What? Marvel getting tired of the status quo and desiring a change-up? What weird universe is this? And how do we get there? The plan was to have Peter retire as Spider-Man, as him and MJ at the time were going to have a baby and would pass the mantle on to Ben. Simple, but things didn't go as planned. As mentioned, Marvel was suffering bankruptcy, and the marketing department noticed that in DC, they were having smash hits with both the death and reign of Superman and the Batman Nightfall storyline, and demanded that the Clone Saga would be the equivalent of those two, stretching out to the point where it lasted longer than both those storylines, for at least 2 years, leading into several side stories, like Ben becoming the superhero Scarlet Spider, 2 Mysterio wannabes spying on the two, more clones showing up like Jack and Spider-Side, and a literal army of Spider-Man clones, retconning past stories like bringing back the Jackal, who died in the original Clone Saga. And remember when I said Peter didn't care if he was a clone or not, and Ben decided that him being a clone wouldn't define him? Well, the writers didn't, as most of the time Peter and Ben are sulking as the Jackal reveals Ben might not be a clone and it's actually Peter, or either one of them is the genuine article, but then it really was Ben, and oh god. As you can guess, and many will tell you, this was a Gordian knot of insanity. Now, things would eventually cool down as they did do what they originally planned and had Peter pass the mantle to Ben. And for a while, it did seem permanent, with Ben getting his own cast of characters, interacting with more of the greater Marvel universe, and even got a part to play in Marvel vs. DC in the following amalgam line of comics. Unfortunately, unlike nowadays where 80% of fans would welcome this change, fans back in the 90s weren't as happy. After only a year of being Spider-Man, Peter would return to the mantle and have another retcon revealing that Norman Osborn was the true mastermind and that he didn't actually die in Amazing Spider-Man issue 122 in 1973. Along with that, they also retconned Aunt May's death because I guess fans really wanted to see her back too. And as for Peter and MJ's kid, well, that's simple. Norman killed it. Yeah, of course it would lead to a big fight, ending with Ben once again heroically sacrificing himself for Peter, turning into dust, with the wind blowing him away. Ben would be remembered both fondly by Peter and others, with his fellow clone Kane Parker even taking up his mantle later on as Scarlet Spider in a very underrated solo series, and the two even teaming up with an alternate version of Ben where he stayed as Spider-Man in the Spider-Verse storyline. Though the 90s Clone Saga ended up becoming a mess, Ben Reilly was remembered as a hero and less of a clone of Peter Parker, but more of a brother. Until 2017. During the tail end of Dan Slott's run on Amazing Spider-Man, he began an ongoing storyline called The Clone Conspiracy, where the Jackal, now decked out in a sleek new design, began manipulating both villains and supporting characters in the Spider-Man comics with the clones of their dead loved ones. It is revealed that this Jackal is not Miles Warren, but actually Ben Reilly, who Warren resurrected and killed over and over again until Ben finally snapped, broke free, and took over Warren's mantle and operations. By the end of the story, it looked like he was going to return to his heroic nature, with him even getting his own solo series and once again taking up the Scarlet Spider mantle. However, it did not go well. For a more detailed synopsis on that though, I recommend checking out Sense Voice Network's video Ben Reilly's Many Deaths Explained. But in short, most pretend it didn't happen. Enter Zeb Wells and Beyond, where Ben gets to be Spider-Man once more, working for the Beyond Corporation, who want to profit off the name Spider-Man. As I said before in the Hallows Eve review, it actually started off promising, with Ben and Janine reunited, Ben getting to interact with the greater Marvel Universe again. But of course it didn't last, as Beyond was revealed to not just be an evil organization, which, yeah, wasn't a big shock for any of us, but they were also adding Ben's memories, making him forget key moments of both him and Peter's life to make him more compliant. Unfortunately, it got to the point where he started becoming less heroic and making selfish decisions, like leaving MJ to face off a villain on her own. Eventually he realizes what happened, but for some reason trusts the words of the one behind it all, Maxine Danger, who tells him that he has to put on a mind-altering helmet on Peter to get his memories back, and Peter, not yet made a complete idiot by Wells, knows how stupid that sounds, as she could be lying, but Ben doesn't want to hear it, and they begin to fight. During the fight, a giant vat of ooze that powered the mind-wiping device almost consumes Peter, but Ben sacrifices himself once again, but instead of dying, well, I'll talk more about it in the actual review, but in short, whatever Zeb Wells wants. Ben would become the supervillain Chasm, and at first vows revenge on Beyond, but then Peter for some reason, and eventually him and Janine would team up with Madelyne Pryor, aka the Goblin Queen.